Talk to me, talk to me, talk to me. Your magical kiss take me just so far. Talk to me, talk to me, talk to me. Don't leave me like this, dangling from a star. Set me all aflame and it's so pleasing. It sure would be a shame if you were only teasing. So my love, before I go, turn the lights way down low and talk to me. Talk to me, talk to me. Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Don McKeag Show. Kenny Buke's in the control room there, and we are back for, Kenny, our 44th show, is it, or 43rd? 44th. And we're happy to have you with us here. We are on hopefully, every Thursday from 6 to 7. In Plymouth. We are shown in 14 different towns through public television. I am also on a radio show. I've had a radio show for 20 years with and without a partner. Ed Lambert was my partner for many years, and now I have just Saturdays at 11 o'clock from 11 to 1 on 95.1 WXTK. To laugh often and much. To win the respect of intelligent people and affection of children. To win the appreciation of honest critics and endure the betrayal of false friends. To appreciate beauty. To find the best in others. To leave the world a bit better. Whether by a healthy child, a garden patch, or a redeemed social condition. To know even one life has breathed easier because you have lived. This is to have succeeded. Ralph Waldo Emerson, his definition of success. The purpose of this show, the reason I'm doing this show, and Kenny, is to give voice to those many people who want to leave the world a better place, who see things going on in this wonderful country of ours that are just not leaving the world or the country better. It's an uphill fight. It's a very, very dangerous situation we're in because we have not learned from history. We are in the doldrums right where Rome, the ancient power of the world, placed itself for the same reasons. Moral decadence, apathy, too much wealth, too many things, too little belief in God, selfishness, greed, envy, all the 7 deadly sins. And so what I try to talk about here is the ideas that I learned. I'm now in my 70s, and I grew up, Kenny was there too, in the 50s, and we know the difference. One of the problems with young people today, and it's been fostered and enlarged by a very, very dangerous, decadent press who does not want law and order. They don't want things to get along, people to get along, because it's not newsworthy. It's not good to cover. They can't wait for tragedy. They can't wait for criminal behavior. And if they don't get it when they want it, they are so low, they will create it. They will create it with dishonest reporting, absolute lies, and they will pay people to create the crimes. That's how bad it is in the greed for money. So we try to give you, not only, I make no apologies, I am a conservative, a former JFK, devoted JFK Democrat who has left the party, but has, like so many of us, found no option in the Republican Party other than to get rid and remove the people that are in there. That is why Donald Trump has seen such a high level of support. I wish a lot of you understood that, especially Democrats. I know about some of the things he says that are unnecessary. He still, except, of course, when you're a conservative or a Republican or whatever, when you're not a liberal Democrat, you somehow don't have free speech. Now, when you're a liberal Democrat in the United States, you can say anything you want. Oh, there might be a little buzz, but it's perfectly okay because, once again, the press determines that it's free speech. They are so beyond anything other than hypocrisy. It is, again, you just can't even go there because it's daily. Well, here's one of the things that proves that. Napoleon Bonaparte, 1814, said, 4 hostile newspapers are more to be feared than 1,000 bayonets. Now imagine that. That's almost 300 years ago. And it was just the same. So we are in that particular place today. And all I can do, and all those of us that try to make the world a little better place, to make it better than we had it when we were born. And I'll tell you, it is not the case now. Those of us that lived in the 50s and 60s, oh, of course, there were problems. There was Vietnam. There was the assassination of Ted and Jack Kennedy, of Bobby and Jack Kennedy. And there were all sorts of racial upheavals, college disorder. I understand that. But that was the beginning, I believe, of the decay of the moral core that this country had done so well on after World War II. We've got a couple of things, Kenny, to talk about here, but one of the things I wanted to just mention was an article that I haven't gotten to on previous shows, but it's this man says, I like to see a man proud of the place in which he lives. I like to see a man who lives in it so that his place will be proud of him. Abraham Lincoln. Let's say this. I like to see a man proud of the place in which he lives. I like to see a man who lives in it so that his place will be proud of him. We have political pundits, and we have newspapers, and we have college professors that spend a lot of time bad-mouthing the United States of America. It's in the liberal democratic leadership, and it's in the left, because their purpose is to tear down what we have, not to correct, not to make things better. Their purpose, make no bones about it, is to create a new world, and that new world can only come if the most powerful country, the most successful country ever to walk the face of the earth, is destroyed. Make no bones about it. You liberal Democrats, you are part of that, and you don't know it. Their goal, this leftist group, many of whom are in foreign countries, and people don't even know, well-intended Americans don't know who's pulling the strings. And this article talks about it's time to upset the establishment politicians. I wrote politicians, not Republicans or Democrats. They are all in it the same. And for the many voters who don't show up during the primary election, they are to blame for the electorate voting the same idiots back into office. Just remember that. You won't miss a Patriots game. My God, you won't go and see the grandkids if the Patriots are playing. Some of you won't miss the American Idol, although I think that's losing some of its power. But voting, oh, you'll miss that and not think it matters a bit. That's one of the problems. But here's where Trump, this guy's name is Wayne Allen Root that wrote this. Kenny, by the way, have you got something that you wanted to interject before I talk about this little segment?
Well, actually, I had a whole bunch of items that I wanted to discuss, but you're going down a road that I would like to see us go down today. So why don't you go ahead?
Well, I'm going to also go to Patrick Kennedy. Is that in your list?
Yes.
Yeah. This is just an introduction only, because I hope that this is a building block to go into why I started with Ralph Waldo Emerson is, again, the idea of what success is in America today and how warped it is by the television. Unfortunately, a wonderful, sheer genius invention that wasn't around when we were early kids, right? It came in when we were, just growing up, had wonderful, wonderful potential, and it lives up to its potential with people like Ken Burns and a lot of really fine shows, really good, informative documentaries, and some good programming. Obviously now it's amazing what we can all see when a sports game is put on, where you have the replays. I mean, there's some wonderful things. They also offer religious, services of all different religions, so that people that are shut in at home or in rest homes are able to see that. Television provides, I can't imagine our grandparents and great-grandparents not having something to keep them entertained other than reading, of course, but they didn't have. Imagine, Kenny, when our grandparents, our forefathers, if they were ill and they were shut in, I mean, and then, when they're old, they lose their eyesight. I mean, imagine day after day after day losing your eyesight, then perhaps your hearing, and you live on to be in your 80s and 90s. Imagine. I mean, that was tough.
I remember growing up, Donnie,
Yep.
that there were 3 newspapers a day. And in our neighborhood, and I grew up in the city, as you know, in our neighborhood, just about every family would get all 3 newspapers a day just to stay informed.
Just to stay informed.
And then, after dinner, everybody would gather around the radio, if you were fortunate enough to have one, and sit there and listen to all of the programs of the day, which at that time was like The Shadow, Green Hornet. I'm sure you can remember those shows.
Of course I do. Yep.
And, television has brought something new to many, many people. The only thing I don't like about TV is the trash television. There's so much trash.
Well, but this is what I'm saying. It started out, and it has a tremendous, but it has become a negative.
Yes.
And our people now have so many options that our ancestors didn't have. We didn't have,
Right.
as you pointed out, that things like voting, which I just mentioned, that people won't vote. They get too many options. Okay, one, and their interest isn't there. They don't even watch the news.
No, they don't.
Talk radio, which is the single most informative entertainment there is, whether the liberals and the Democrats and the left will never admit it, but it truly is, because it deals with the facts and with experiences. They all point out when they tried, the lefts and the Democrats tried to get this fairness doctrine passed, if you remember, where they were going to require every single station that was granted a license from the FCC that they had to give equal time to liberals as they gave to conservatives.
I recall.
Now, I know there's people listening. I'll probably not, because the only ones listening to me are going to listen because they want facts and they have a conservative bent. But the people don't. The reason that was so insane, but so typical of today's Democratic Socialist Party. That's what we have now. We have the Republican Party, we have independents, and we have the Democratic Socialist Party. We do not have the Democratic Party that I was once a member of, period. And that socialistic behavior was absolutely transparent in this fairness doctrine, because it eliminated the reason that people are on other than public TV. Now, if they have a fairness doctrine here, which they do in public TV, if liberals are on equal to us, in Carver and here. Now, but it's not based on a profit. See, it's just like why I can't stand the Democrats running the government, because they just don't ever think of a bottom line of where the costs go and what the impact is on the taxpayer. And the fairness doctrine basically was going to make stations which have a bottom line, which have shareholders, stockholders. I'm talking about big stations.
Right.
They were going to make them have liberals on who nobody listened to. That's what had happened. It is. Let me just tell you, ladies and gentlemen, if liberal talk show hosts had an audience and had people paying to advertise, there'd be liberals on just as much. You wouldn't have to have a fairness doctrine. And that was the whole crux of it. It was not only not fair, it was totally unfair. But liberals don't care about that. They don't care if no one's listening. Their idea was that a government grants a license to somebody, then they're going to dictate to that business. And what bothers me, you Democrats and you people who support the Democratic Party, I once was a member, remember that, is if you're in business, you're supporting a mentality. You're supporting a functionary purpose in the socialist movement that's out to damage your ability to make a profit. And yet you keep voting for Democrats. And that's the crux of it. And you keep voting for Democrats because you're worried about the media. All these politicians give an equal amount, all of these big corporations give an equal amount of money to the Democrats and Republicans, even though the Democrats can be passing law after law after law that limits their ability to do business. Like the environmentalists, the Democratic out-of-control environmentalists that have, this is 15 years ago when I was on the morning show, they actually had a quota, the DEA, and it came out, of course the media just, it was reported for about 2 seconds. They closed down a factory in Minnesota or Wisconsin somewhere to meet this quota. They hadn't shut enough places down. That's their mentality. They didn't have enough to show people. That's why this global warming is such a fiasco. Yes, we're going through temperature changes. We've done so for millions of years, and we have nothing to do with it. We can pollute the air, no question. But we do not ultimately cause temperature changes. But that's an aside. The point I was making was that you have... What was the point I was making, Kenny? I just went off and took a U-turn.
Well, we were talking...
Well, before I just did the U-turn on the global warming.
Yes, we were
do you
talking
agree?
about television and the impact it's had.
No. What I'm just talking about right this last second. That's shameless. But it has to do with the business community. This factory, the factory they shut down. Right. Guess what the factory was? It was bread. They were baking bread and other goods, and the odor. The DEA DEP, you know, they had a couple of complaints over the smell of bread.
Bacon?
And they closed of course, there was an uproar because there was something like 427 jobs there.
Of course, yes.
But they were more interested in their quota. Now, you Democrats that own businesses, if you don't think you're capable of having that happen to you, you're fruitcakes. But you are anyway if you support this present Democratic Party. So, excuse me, Kenny, that was... But television now has become the absolute demise of so many standards. And it's all because they play toward our basic instincts of lust, greed, envy, sloth. We've got people getting a check every single week or every single month that are capable of working and don't now in Massachusetts, they don't even have to try to go and get a job. They sit, they get fat, then we have to deal with them in terms of diabetes and in terms of the hospital beds and pay that, and they sit and watch television all day. And they have kids. And that's what we've come, and then the television newscasters think this is fine. So anyway, these are the things that television, unfortunately, now has done, and yet they still obviously provide a huge service. But we have a powerful weapon here now that is out of control depending upon the hands that control it. And the FCC and others, again, when you have liberals in charge, you know, we have the F word now being used by all sorts of people on TV. It used to be, I mean, I was on the radio 20 years. You can't say S-H-I-T. You can't say, you know, you could be shut off the air now, and you can see the football players, they're all the F words. Why? Because they've lowered the standards. Because liberals say there's nothing wrong with that. That's part of the American culture. And it just goes on, right? And in terms of what happens with these young people's shows, they're in bed, 14 years old, and they're in bed together, a couple. It's just, but again, liberals don't want any kind of oversight. Hollywood, they ended it. Why? Because they know that we're all guilty of appealing to sexually oriented things. We get vicarious pleasure, but the country suffered for it. Now I'm off on the side that we got to get back to what the show was originally going to go to.
And I want to add one thing.
Go for it, Kenny.
Last comment.
Yes.
Today. The moral values of television have gone so low that now big companies have come from that, and you have companies like Netflix and Redbox. When you go to the supermarket, you'll see this red dispensing machine there, and they're dispensing DVDs. And this is supposed to have an effect on quality broadcasting so that you can select materials for viewing which are supposedly free of the low moral standards that we see in many today. Anyways, that's my diatribe.
Yeah, well, and not a diatribe, but remember the fiasco of the ratings of movies. I mean, it is just a joke, and so is television in general. I've turned on the family channels, you know, and you've got two women kissing each other, two adult women, and they're the head of this particular show, and they're lesbians. So liberals feel that that's fine because that's part of life. Of course it's part of life, but it isn't a majority part of life.
Well, they put a rating at the beginning of that program now, too.
Well, no.
Which is another sad state of affairs. I mean, TV was never like that in the beginning, that it had to have a rating before you'd start showing the show.
Well, again, if you let the fox run the chicken coop, you see, and what the politicians, both sides, this is why it's come to this, is when we have our elections last way too long. I've mentioned this before. In Britain, I think it's 9 months or maybe a year, that's all. They don't give them all the time, and that's why, because the greed of the television industry and liberals. Oh, yeah, And there's billions of dollars to be made by corporate America. Now, corporate America, that's why they give millions and millions of dollars to both Democrats and Republicans. They don't want to offend anybody. They don't care about standards. They care about their product being sold. Simple as that. So if they don't care about standards, they certainly don't want any kind of stoppage on programming if that program is drawing people. I mean, Jerry Springer, can you imagine? And you know what, liberals, it's beautiful. Their justification, if you don't like it, shut it off.
Change the channel.
Just change the channel, and that makes it okay.
Wow. Not really.
Yeah. Well, no, in their mind.
Yes.
But what they're doing is pandering too. So the reason the public can't win is because the politicians that are in office because of the huge millions of dollars given to them by corporate America and by unions, but by corporate America. And so corporate America then wants them and gets them to vote not to have any kind of high standards or to not say no to any shows. Mm-hmm. And who suffers? The whole culture suffers. But it is part of the demise of America, and it's a shame. But what I was the article that this man was talking about, Wayne Root, that I just wanted to. He's really over the top in some ways, but he's talking about Donald Trump's breath of fresh air. Now we've all been heard about this, but. He, of course, is speaking for so many people, but it doesn't matter to the politicians because the Republican Party, again, instead of them listening to Trump, doesn't matter whether you like him or not, but if you listen to where he's coming from and the response from millions and millions of people, Democrats, Republicans, independents alike, this isn't a Republican response. In fact, the Republican candidates are doing their best to dethrone him and to undermine him and to badmouth him. Not a one of them has said, maybe we're off base here. Maybe the general maybe there's a big vote, like Nixon once said, the silent majority. Maybe we better start going into Central and America the way America really is out there that isn't getting a voice. Nope. Why? Because, again, political correctness and the big money people just aren't going to follow them. They are bought and paid for. They don't want to offend. That's why Donald Trump has his own billions of dollars. He doesn't need to do that. That's why we're seeing his honesty, his rattling the cages of these pompous, absolutely useless politicians who will do anything to get reelected. Why? Because they've got it soft. They've got different health care than the rest of us. They've got a retirement after 2 terms that you and I'd work a whole lifetime for. And they've got prestige. Well, anyway, I don't even want to go to that article. What I did want to mention is this will date this. We do show our we're on YouTube, right, Kenny? And those that would like to see or like what you're hearing or would like to participate, you may write to me, by the way, at Donald McKeag, McKeag. Oh, has he got it up there? Yeah, he's got it right up there at Post Office Box 7, South Carver. We also have normally call-in shows, but we're taping this show because of another event going on. But the idea of all of us being together is just not there anymore, and it's been created in a variety of ways. But the biggest thing, of course, is the media, because as I stated earlier, they make their money on discord. They make their money on us not getting along. And the politicians, by the way, they like discord because then they can use it in the pursuit of their goal. But on top of that, the saddest thing and the strongest thing is the legal profession. That's where their bread is buttered. The more laws that are passed, the more lawsuits there are, and the more money the law firms can make. And that is why politicians will not do anything about the abuse of tort liability in our legal system. Many lawyers I know have said it's been abused for years. It will never get changed in the Supreme Court, never get changed in any court. Why? Because it's too much money. They're making too much money by creating more lawsuits. Police departments like it, you know. Our seatbelt laws, all of this other stuff that basically is taking away individual rights under the guise of safety. Now, it has some merit, but let me tell you, it isn't the reason. The reason is because the insurance companies and their billions of dollars that we pay them goes to politicians to make sure they vote for a seatbelt law because it benefits the insurance company. It also benefits the lawyers because then there's more lawsuits from automobile accidents. It's just a vicious circle, and it's part of what happens with an affluent, as I mentioned, society that loses sight of the individual. We are no longer really individuals, and but I keep wanting to give out my radio number.
What I want you to do in place of your radio number,
Yes.
I want you to tell people to visit your webpage at donaldmckay.com. It's up on the screen right now.
That's correct.
And I also, for a brief moment, want to discuss why we're not live tonight.
Well, go ahead.
Don has written a book, and the book is a very interesting story of Don's, as I like to say, trials and tribulations.
Called a memoir.
It's a memoir.
Yes.
And the name of the book is, well, at least I own a Rolls Royce.
Yes.
Hard for me to say.
Well, at least I owned a Rolls Royce. Some people out there, I wonder the younger ones don't even know what a Rolls Royce is.
Well, I found it
It's an
amazing.
automobile. It's a very expensive automobile in Britain.
I found it amazing that you never spent any time in the back seat using the bar. You were too busy
Using the
driving it.
bar. Well, who said I didn't? I didn't drive it all the time. I had a little chauffeur from Paris named Noelle,
Oh.
who was lovely, and she was Yvonne Lendl, the tennis player's sister-in-law, which I didn't mention. Yeah.
There's a very detailed story about the Rolls and the Asa Burris house and many other of the interesting facets of your
The
life.
saga. It's a saga, right, Kenny?
Including your run-in and eventual friendship, long-term friendship, with our distinguished, now past, senior state senator.
Not state, federal.
Federal senator.
Yes.
sorry.
Ted
Senator
Kennedy.
Ted Kennedy.
Edward Moore Kennedy was a
And,
very dear friend,
That's another very interesting story in this book.
which
And
we will get to, by the way, as you and I discussed.
as I know.
Yes.
Now, the other part of going to Don's webpage is if you go to his webpage, there's a little tab there where you can drop down the tab and you can use PayPal. And we're not allowed in this segment of the media, this particular show, to discuss the price, but you can use PayPal right there on Don's website.
You can buy the book, in other words, yes.
But you're not supposed to say that, Donnie.
Oh, is that right?
But, most people, when you lead them to the water hole, they understand what they're supposed to do. But anyways, it's a very good read. It's a very good book, and the reason why we're not live tonight is that Donnie is having a book signing. And where is that book signing tonight?
Well, there's a series, and I'm glad, thank you, Kenny, because there is going to be a book signing, a book launch at Baxter's. Now, the trouble is, Ken, I don't know when is this going to be aired this Thursday, right? Yes, this week. So a couple of these things you may not. On Thursday at Baxter's Boathouse in Hyannis, where I was the first piano player, there's a whole chapter in the book about it, there is a book signing from 4 to 6. Well, then if you've seen this show, that means that tomorrow, when the show's been seen, there is another book signing at the Flying Bridge Restaurant on Falmouth Harbor, which I also owned at one time. And then there will be the books will be for sale in Cousins in Falmouth on Main Street bookstore, in the Mashpee Market Place bookstore, and in Osterville at the Books by the Sea. But we will also be having a signing at Booksmith on the 17th of October, Saturday after my radio show. And a doctor in town, I won't mention his name, but he's asked that we might have a signing at Rye Tavern in Plymouth. And we have not yet determined that date, but we'll have time to give you that because it'll be later in October. And also, we have not finalized, but there will be a signing and a little talk at the Plymouth Library, who, by the way, were wonderful in helping me. I'm one of those old fogies that was long to learn the computer, and they were so helpful to me, and the library is so beautiful. What a wonderful, wonderful thing in the town of Plymouth. And also, Carver Library, there is going to be another signing there and a little talk at Carver on November 5th at 7 o'clock at night, which I believe is also a Monday. So keep posted if you're regulars to this show. You'll get updates if you'd like to come, and I'd love to have you. Obviously, I'd like to sell you a book, and I hope, like Kenny said, I think it's a good read. I've been getting nice returns. If anyone reads the Falmouth Enterprise this coming Friday, they're doing a nice piece on me and on the book. But as he said, it is a memoir, but there are a lot of things about the restaurant business, the ups and downs of it, and there are a lot of things about Cape Cod. Kenny, yes.
Donnie, we also cannot forget our people throughout the United States that watch this program
on YouTube. Yes.
And we need to make sure that those people are aware that they can visit DonaldMcKeag.com and order the book, and they can also go to your Facebook page.
Correct.
And order the book.
Correct.
The difference on that page is it is Don
McKeag. Yes.
At Facebook. And that's another
Oh, that's
graphic.
what threw me off.
and exactly. They can order the book from you directly.
Right.
And that is also by PayPal. So they've got many places where they can go and contact you. They can write to you at Post Office Box 7 in South Carver, 02366. They can go to DonaldMcKeag.com, and they can also go to Don McKeag at Facebook.
At Facebook.
And I'm going to go back and...
No, thank you. That's excellent. And so what I wanted to let you know, too, was that... what was I going to do, Kenny? See, you mesmerized me.
You were talking about...
Oh, no, about the book, though.
The book in the library.
The libraries will have it. Both the Plymouth Library and the Carver Library also have the books on hand now, should you want to borrow it and read it. But I hope there's an awful lot in there, especially if you've been anywhere near my vintage. There's a lot about times in the 50s. I went to the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. There's a whole section up there, and I was a skier, so there's a section on Aspen, Colorado, and on North Conway. And there is, when I sold the Flying Bridge, I moved into a beautiful little house in Hyannisport, and that is when I became a close friend of Senator Edward M. Kennedy. And there are stories, fun stories, positive stories about him that I hope will be informative, but mostly entertaining, and also show the side of this man that I would not have traded wanted his life for anything, and neither would most of you if you really looked at it. And Kenny, that brings us up to what was on television. As I said, this. How much time have we got here? Because I'm not seeing the. I see the our time.
You've got just about 15 minutes.
About 15 minutes. Okay, so yeah. Well, the next what we were leading up to is if you watched last night's 60 Minutes. This is we're taping the show on a Monday after the 60 Minutes and after the Patriots, of course, weren't playing. And another, I know him very well through the family, and that is that last night there was an appearance on 60 Minutes of Patrick Kennedy, Ted Kennedy's youngest son, which I'm sure most of you are certainly aware of. A nice young man. I've known him since he was a real young kid, who had his problems with addictions and with also bipolar, and there's a lot of differing opinions on his appearance last night. And I thought I'd weigh in just because in my book I also talk, I'm Irish, and that's not to say that it's just an Irish thing, but there is a preponderance in the Irish race. I think it has a lot to do with the slaughter of babies and the famine, a potato famine, and the Irish suffered a lot in the 1800s especially. And alcohol became a mainstay of their, of their existence. And this isn't making excuses, and certainly not casting aspersions at the Irish, because I am one. And my family, we all suffered through the same kind of problems that product can cause. Well, anyway, what I just wanted to discuss, and you may, have a little discussion within your own family. Patrick, there's two ways to look at it. Last night he went on and shared what it was like. He's written a book. And as I have, and mine just came out, and evidently his is coming out today, Monday, which is October 5th, I believe. And so he, there is, some criticism. I was very concerned because the Globe mentioned that he was going to be on in Sunday's paper, and it looked kind of like it was going to be an expose more than a discussion, but he did a good job with what he, I think, said, but there were some inaccuracies, or at least different, opinions to be had. His family was, especially young Teddy Jr., who I also know, was quite upset about him sharing this on television. Now, in my book, I share, problems with alcohol that were in my family that affected me, which in both the use of it and other things. And it's a common experience within families. So the question and why I bring this up is just because someone's famous and just because there's been tragedy, our vintage, Kenny, you don't air your dirty laundry. And it was very hard for me to talk about my family at the beginning of the book. But the reason I did is because, and I loved my father. He was a great man, a great person. And he had tragedy in his life, which, of course, is the parallel I'm going to draw here with Ted and why I love the man. He was the kindest. He did more for more people. I'm not excusing other behaviors, but I am saying that what the good Lord put on his shoulders, let me tell you, I don't know. I've never met another man that I think could have done any better, even with the tragedy of Chappaquiddick and the tragedies of other events that were certainly not acceptable behavior by Ted. But what I'm saying is that the influence that all our parents have on us in their behaviors, it comes through generationally, and the impact is sometimes is not noticed until years later. I mean, we now know that there are abusers, child abusers, who were abused themselves. Now, common sense, you would say, how could you possibly do that when you experience that? Well, the brain evidently doesn't always shut down to that. In reverse, it now can implant some kind of a memory of that horrible experience as a child and repeat it in you. And that's why we talk about alcoholism, drug addiction, sexual addictions. These things can be passed on generationally. Now, obviously, all of us want to be able to say, well, wait a minute, that's stupid. If you went through all that pain and you saw all that suffering, you should be able to say, I'll never do that. And some do. Others say it and can't do it. It's like smoking. I had an uncle and an aunt, grandparents. They smoked. I can remember hearing my uncle. Fortunately, I never was a smoker. I like a cigar once in a while. But I can remember them as I'm talking about as a boy saying, I'll never smoke like them. They smoked exactly like them. I had a cousin that saw her mother and father both die of lung cancer, and she smoked and died of lung cancer in her 30s. And it shows you the power of the addiction. But anyway, last night I watched, as many did, and I understand the family being very upset with Patrick. But I think his motivation has some merit and some serious merit, and that is to just make all of us aware that it is not something that we necessarily can control if it's genetic, but it has to be noticed, and the person has to be willing to take their own inventory and say, wait a minute, I've got to either get help, which Patrick ended up doing, but was forced to because he ended up in an automobile accident in Washington while he was a congressman. And it was all over the papers, and he finally, But what he tried to say, I think, Kenny, you saw it,
I did,
was that he was not there to malign his parents, but some of what he said bordered on that. Didn't you think?
yes, and some of the pushback from the family.
Yes.
When I was watching it, the pushback he was explaining. The family's answer was, we don't air our dirty laundry.
Right, just what I just said, and that, of course, that's very.
And he said that he was doing it as part of his, and my interpretation is, so I'm embellishing here, he's doing it because this is part of his recovery.
Well, yes and no. Unfortunately, when you have celebrity it's my experience. I don't have that. I have minimal, but I suppose. But some people need the attention, and that was also an attention getting. And he's back on the, you know, when you're followed around and worshipped by people, it becomes its own addiction.
Yes.
And you know, this is why we see, ladies and gentlemen, what happens to a lot of athletes. And you know, you're lucky if you get into your middle 30s playing football or basketball or any of that. And then what do? People are kissing your fanny and begging you to come to their house and begging you to speak, and all of a sudden that stops. And it is not an easy thing for most people to give up. That's a part of an addiction to excitement is what causes a lot of these things, you know. People, and that a lot of it is in the sexual thing. The abuses, there's an excitement of breaking, you know, doing something wrong. And that's how sick the mind can become, you know. And if Patrick's diagnosed with bipolar, then that's another additional thing. But for those in this book that I talk about with Ted, and one of the purposes was not to use my friendship with him to sell my books, and I've done all I can to try to make sure that isn't the case. These are all legitimate stories that come at different times in the 20 years that I was a good friend, spent a lot of time with him. But what bothers me is that one of the things that Patrick talked about was that they called Ted in and talked to him about his drinking, and he got upset and left, and told the family he told Patrick he didn't want to speak with him for quite some time over this because he thought the kids had no business telling him. Now you can say that that's wrong, but Joan had a drinking problem long before Ted, and it was generational. Her mother died of chronic alcoholism, and Joan always was afraid she was going to also have that, and it was like self-fulfilling. And I know her sister very well, who's wonderful, and doesn't drink at all, and hasn't for years and years, in fear of that. So I think Ted was probably hurt because he had to watch over those kids when Joan, the mother, was having, you know, real serious alcoholic incidences. And for them to then forget that, and Patrick to forget that was a whole different thing. Here he is, a senator. He's dealing with his own demons and what he's gone through. So that is part of what I could see. I gave him credit, and I think that he may very well have helped some of the observers. I hope so, because that, I believe, is really what he hoped to do, and to get people in families to talk about it. I think that was a legitimate point, Kenny, is that a lot of families, they know, you know, the uncle's a drunk or he's always drunk, and they just let him go on his way, and they don't either acknowledge it or pay much attention. And that, of course, is sad. But I just want to look at my friend Ted, for those who, you know, there's people who just hate Ted Kennedy. They just, you know, they think, I mean, I hear Howie Carr and others, they call him a murderer. That's another thing I wonder about Patrick's appearance, because evidently Howie Carr, those that don't know, he is a very popular radio host. He has a good show. He's conservative and he's informative, and he was a reporter for years and years, so he knows a lot. But unfortunately, he's going to come out with a Kennedy book. He's written several. He's written one about Whitey Bulger and about a couple of other murderers in Boston, politics in Boston area. Now, I think he may find, though, that his review is going to meet with, we have a short period right here, Kenny?
4 minutes.
What? 4 minutes, okay. Well, anyway, so I think writing this book may bounce back on him. It may not be, you know, treated the same, although his listeners are probably anti-Kennedy. But before we run out, the only thing I wanted to say in support of my very dear friend, Ted, is people, I think, they did a good job. I didn't like Leslie Stahl's question and trying to make something out of, she was looking for a nasty comment about the family. But all I remember, and once I learned about it, he told me one time, Donnie, I don't have time for whiners and moaners. He just got up every day, was the hardest working senator in there, got along with both sides of the aisle, was the youngest of, 9 children, very young, and went through the trauma first of losing his brother, Jack, as president. That's one thing. And then what people forget is, on top of that, now he's dealing with problems in his own home with the drinking of his wife. And then, on top of that, they didn't mention, and they don't, there's a plane crash right in between the death of 2 brothers. And Bobby Kennedy rushed to the site. It was in Northampton, Massachusetts, on his way to a Democrat convention. The pilot and a friend of Ted's, both friends, died. He broke his back in 3 places and was given last rites twice. This is in, I believe, 64 or 5. So Jack is killed in 63. He is almost killed in 64 or 5. Bobby rushes up and thinks he's the last brother. They didn't think Ted was going to survive. And then just shortly after, he's on crutches. His back was never the same. He had to wear a back brace the rest of his life. And lo and behold, he and his brother were just recovering, and both members of the Senate, and then his brother Bob is killed also. So the trauma of all those things. And then that man was responsible for all of Bobby's 10 children, I believe. Ethel, of course, was pregnant with their last child. He's responsible, he's the father figure to Caroline and John, as well as his own 3 children. He's a senator, and he's also the head of the household. His mother lived to be 104, and he had Chappaquiddick. And Chappaquiddick, though, it's inexcusable, I understand, and there was drinking, but Chappaquiddick took place. It was the boiler room. It was a group of girls and other that had worked for Bobby. And Chappaquiddick, over on Martha's Vineyard, it had not even been a year after the death of Bob. So it had to have been a very nostalgic and painful event in the first place for Ted. No excuses. I'm not doing that. But I'm talking about the magnitude of what fate and what God put on that man's shoulders. So, the drinking, I saw him. I never saw him bad, but I participated with him. We never got into anything. I never saw it. And he never used bad language. He was a good man. And I hope what Patrick did on TV will be helpful to others. I hope the family can be understanding, but I don't think Patrick really ever understood the things I saw and so many of his closest friends that made Ted Kennedy such a remarkable human being with warts and all. We all have them. So, God bless. Hope you've enjoyed a little of the show. I'd love to think you might be interested in buying my book. And as Kenny said, go to donaldmckeag.com and it'll come right up. God bless and have a wonderful weekend. And we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.